I think everyone loves an underdog story. The idea of overcoming the odds is a theme that goes all the way back to the beginning of Yu-Gi-Oh! With the iconic Heart of the Cards moment signaling that comeback when all hope is lost. And it's a theme that a lot of players resonate with. You can see how excited players get when old or underutilized decks perform well in competitive events. And while these decks aren't usually winning events, there always seems to be one or two rogue decks that sneak into the top 32. Which really makes me wonder, how big is the power gap between a meta deck and a rogue deck, considering that they seem to have the capacity to top events in the right hands? And I think the only way to really understand it is to try a rogue deck myself. So first, I actually want to talk about rogue decks in general. And to be honest, this subject is not really my area of expertise. As much as I love and praise the arts and themes of this game, I actually have a very competitive mindset, and I tend to always just play the best strategy in pretty much any game that I try. And I do this mostly so when I make a mistake, I can really only blame myself. And normally what I do is go to r/Master Duel and just try to summarize the opinions of like 1,000 angry Redditors. But this time I actually wanted to try something a little different. I wanted to ask someone who returned to the game around the same time as me, but plays mostly casual decks instead of meta decks, and ask their opinion on their experiences playing rogue decks in the modern day. So I invited a friend of the channel, Pepper Wentz YGO, to this video so I could ask him a few questions about his experience. First, introduce yourself and tell us when you got back into the game and why you decided to get back into the game.
My name is Pepper. I've been streaming for like, 3 years maybe? I just got into Yu-Gi-Oh! Recently, like 4-5 months ago. I got into a rabbit hole of I started watching like GX dub moments. I started watching the anime, the first season of GX, and I was like, oh, I want to play the game now. I was told that I should build something like Dragon Mates, that I would enjoy that because it's kinda easy. Not competitive, but like competent, I guess. Like usable, viable. And people told me, my chat told me, like, yeah, you're not gonna enjoy this.
So I know you've tried a lot of decks so far. What would you say is your top 3 favorite?
Oh, my top 3, without in a specific order, it will be probably Cyber Dragon, Nouvelle, and Sky Striker. Yeah, Sky Striker.
So what actually drew you to these decks? Was it the art and the themes, or was it a gameplay loop that interested you?
Well, actually, I feel like I have 3 different answers for each one. Cyber Dragon is because it's that nostalgia thing. It's like super hype to summon a big monster, like Saint did in the anime. It's like the coolest thing ever, right? Big monster, big number, and I feel like that's cool, right? For Nouvelle, it's like the theme. Like how you use the spell cards that are like the rituals are recipes to summon the dishes. And the guys that brings those recipes are the chef. The field spell is a restaurant. There is also the menu that you let your opponent choose what you're gonna cook for them, basically. And I think like it's a very cool theme. And for Sky Striker, what I really like is the gameplay. The gameplay that I connected the most with Sky Striker because of how I can just keep drawing stuff and using spells, and they have like powerful spells. And I also play with basically one monster at a time, right? And it's like super fun to OTK someone with just one monster. I love that I can go second with it, and it's a very versatile deck. I don't know. I like that.
So a lot of people talk about how this game is unbalanced between decks to deck. In your experience returning back to the game so far, do you find yourself at a disadvantage playing these decks? And if you do, how big of a disadvantage do you think it's been?
At least with Nouvelle, I feel like there is not really a disadvantage because most people just don't read the cards. They don't know that if you target something, you trigger a bunch of effects. And I just can tell that they are reading the card after they already messed up, and they just surrender. That has happened so many times. With Cyber Dragon, it's a little easier to understand. And with Cyber Dragon, I really feel like I am a certain disadvantage. Like there's a sweet spot, I guess, between how complex it is and how people don't realize what they are going against. Because there are some people that are really playing the meta and they only know how to play against the meta. So when they see something that is new in a certain way, they are like confused. That is my experience with Nouvelle. But if you go second, it's like hard to go against a lot of negates. Going first is like so good sometimes.
Now, out of curiosity, from a pure gameplay standpoint, do you think there's actually a hidden competitive advantage to playing these fun decks?
I feel like there is some kind of a advantage. Yeah, I feel like there is an advantage of not knowing and having like pressure of with the time, right? Because sometimes you go into a long combo and that's the hardest part, that they have to read a lot under short period of time. I use the example of like if you're learning League of Legends, you at least can understand that if you see like an arrow or like a fireball coming like right to you, you know that next time you have to dodge that, right? You understand that you got hit by something. But in a card game, you cannot do that, right? Your whole board got destroyed and you understand why, or your cards like got banished and you understand why, what happened, or you suddenly cannot activate something and you don't know why if you don't read absolutely everything. The skill of the player is definitely more important than the deck.
And finally, what advice would you give me or anyone else watching who wants to try a casual or fun deck in Master Duel? What should we expect?
So if it's someone who is just getting into Master Duel and they want to start with a casual deck that is fun because they like the theme, I would honestly not advise that. Part of having fun is also winning, right? You probably have to make some kind of concession and find like a middle ground, something that is playable. For me at least, it feels like the game is not fun if you don't win, right? Learning the game with a rogue deck, I feel like it's harder. But if you really like it, you're really passionate, you really know that you like Yu-Gi-Oh or card games, I feel like you can do it maybe. I feel like a good player can make it work with like if the deck is consistent, at least a good player will get victories with a bad archetype, quote unquote bad archetype. Some bad player who has like a $1,000 deck. Yeah, but if like the deck is not consistent and you break all the time, then it's just harder, you know? That is my perspective, at least. Just add there that I'm just a little guy. I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just a silly anime boy on the internet saying stuff. Thank you for inviting me. I honestly wasn't expecting. I feel honored that my input has some value to you.
I want to thank Pepper for actually coming on and sharing some of his insight and experiences. He brought up some points that I honestly didn't even consider. I left the link in his channel below. After this video, go over there, check him out, show him some love, give him a subscribe. I think you guys would really like his content. But after that conversation, it's time for me to decide what rogue decks that I want to play. And to give it a fair shake, I actually chose 2 decks. I picked one deck that hasn't seen modern support in a very long time and is universally hated by the majority of the community. And for the other deck, I picked something that's universally loved by the community and has actually seen some recent modern support. And that way I can compare 2 different rogue decks in this meta to make a more informed opinion. So let's start with the first deck that I played, and it's pretty universally hated by a lot of people, and that deck is Fluanderies. Now, I can already hear the groans from the comments. Hell, even the guide that I read told me that I lacked a moral compass for playing this deck. Which is fair, I did pick it because people hate it. But also I really love the theme of the deck as well. So like my other videos, I'm just going to give you a really quick lore dump. Fluanderies is a deck based off of a real bird, the Arctic tern. This is a small seabird that's famous for its record-breaking migration pattern, going from the Arctic to the Antarctic and back in a single year, traveling about 59,000 miles in a single trip. And Konami turned this idea into a whimsical storybook-like journey. The story starts with Snow giving our main characters, Robina, Elgin, Tugin, and Sturi, a magnificent map. Guided by the map, the group travels the globe from the North Pole to the South Pole, visiting new continents, meeting new friends, and encountering the scary sea, before reaching the giant and powerful bird in the South Pole, Empin. And their spells and traps represent different locations or challenges they encountered along their journey, with their main gimmick of normal summoning multiple times a turn, representing the birds landing in different locations along their migratory route. Which brings us to its gameplay. Fluanderies is a control deck that's focused entirely on normal summoning and tribute summoning monsters. A lot. Which outside of the fun and whimsical lore, this was the biggest draw to me picking this most hated deck. Because the deck completely ignores Maxi and Malcharmi Fuelos, proverbially flipping the bird at these cards anytime they're played. And I'll be honest, the idea of turning one of the most universally powerful cards in the game into a complete brick was kind of funny to me. So how did it perform playing in Master Rank? And I'm just going to rip the band-aid off right away and not sugarcoat it. It's miserable. Let's talk about going second first. Because outside of unexplored wins, decks of this age don't really have built-in ways to deal with going second. You're entirely relying on non-engine to push you to the finish line. And don't get me wrong, going second is a struggle for every deck. but you can definitely tell that the design philosophy to include going second cards and engines is more of a modern design philosophy. I've won plenty of games going second with the deck, but it's not thanks to anything Fluanderies was doing. A lot of games relied entirely on blowout board breakers like evenly matched. So how was going first then? And honestly, better, but you can still really feel the deck's age. Your turn has the potential to end to basically any hand trap under the sun. And yes, the deck has ways to dodge imperm with cards like Advent and Swallow, but your opponent has a better chance of drawing a hand trap than you have of drawing Advent with a bird. And despite me somehow having a positive win rate with the deck after 100 games, every game I played with this deck just felt like an absolute struggle. And for what it's worth, I can see why the supervillains of this world love Fluanderies, but the difference between that deck and something like Dracotail is honestly just night and day. And it really feels like there's no amount of good deck building choices that you can make to really bridge that power gap between the two decks. But like I said, I played two decks, and this other deck seems to be universally loved, so hopefully I'm going to gain a little brownie points back with you guys. And it's also a deck that receives some modern support, and that deck is... Damn, this deck is a lot of fun. Sky Striker feels like it's one of Konami's babies, being even the cover art for the app itself for a while now. And I promise, pulling a Royal Ace Zero as my guaranteed Royal in the Minenko bundle only had a lot of it to do with the reason why I picked this deck. But I'm really glad I picked it. And as much as I'd love to give you guys the lore dump that I normally do, this deck's lore is just a literal light novel. And we'd probably be here for like an hour. But if you're interested like I was, Konami actually made a few animations that you can find in solo mode and also on YouTube. And it'll cover the most crucial of plot points. So Sky Striker can actually be played two ways. One as a blind second OTK deck, and the other as a going first control deck. I chose the going first control deck version because that just interested me more. And to be honest, a lot of the issues that I had with Fluanderies, I don't have at all with Sky Striker. The deck's consistent. It has built-in ways of dealing with going second. It has plenty of options to extend past Interruption. And it has cards like Engage, which is probably the best tutor I've ever seen in this game. Throw on top of it that playing it as a go first deck can still do the OTK and close out a game on an empty board state. And when you bring all of this together and throw in the fact that it actually has a pretty good Dracotail matchup, the deck plays and feels like it should be higher on the tier list. So what's the catch? Where's this power gap? What makes Dracotail the literal best deck in the game and Sky Striker untiered? And after playing 100 games with the deck, I think I kind of figured it out. And this is just a bit of a theory, but bear with me. I think it has to do with how forgiving these decks are to mistakes. And when I say mistakes, I don't mean just outright misplays. I'm talking about situations where you just make a wrong read on what interruption your opponent has or is going to use against you. And a deck like Dracotail is very forgiving to those mistakes. Even if you make a horrendous mess up, you generally still have a way to end on some sort of half board. Where if you make a wrong read on a deck like Sky Striker, it can literally result in ending on a board with zero interruption. And this seems to be the trend with most modern rogue decks. It's not a lack of powerful plays and powerful cards, but instead it's a lack of flexibility when the game starts to not go your way. And it's not a power gap that can be easily measured. You aren't just counting up the amount of interactions the deck can play through. Like, oh, Dracotail can generally play through 2 interruptions, and Fluanderies can generally play through 0 interruptions. But instead we're trying to measure this by how well a deck can recover from its mistakes. And I think from that angle, there is a really big power gap between the two decks. With Striker, you have to play perfectly. And with Dracotail, you can make a ton of mistakes and still win games. Trust me, I was that Dracotail player making a ton of mistakes and winning games still. Where I rarely win games when I make a mistake with Sky Striker. And I think that's a real power gap to consider, and why there's such a big chasm between the two, even though on paper the decks are very similar in power. So in the end, what do I think of this? Is the vocal minority of Reddit right when they tell people that their favorite deck is unplayable? And while I don't think the answer is as black and white as they make it sound, I think I actually need to give the point to Redditors for this one. I was fully ready to defend rogue decks in this video and be like, oh, the power gaps aren't that bad. I was fully expecting it to be an overreaction. But after trying it for myself, there's truly a chasm between tier 1 decks and rogue decks. And I think there's definitely degrees to it. Like a more modern rogue deck like Striker is a lot closer in power to Dracotail than a deck like Fluanderies, which hasn't seen a new card in 5 years. And it should probably stay that way. And the older the deck gets, the harder it is to solve the deck's weaknesses through deck building. And eventually it gets to a point where no matter how good of non-engine choices you make, you're not going to bridge that power gap. And don't get me wrong, I love that these decks can still exist, and that dedicated players can still find ways to steal games from the best decks in the game. I think it's something to celebrate that these old decks don't have a 0% win rate. They can still perform their strategy in modern day Yu-Gi-Oh! And find success. But I can also recognize that decks like these aren't reliable, and they honestly make the game way harder than it needs to be. So yeah, I think there's a massive power gap in this game, which is to be expected at any game with power creep. But I think the difference between the two is actually a little more than I expected. But what do you guys think? How does Konami even address an issue like this? Is the answer more generic slop engines that can just be slotted into any deck? Maybe they put out a suite of cards that support specific subtypes. Or maybe we just accept that they can't resolve it, and that these decks are pretty much just a relic of the past, and tell ourselves it's just time to move on and play a more modern deck. I'm really curious to see what you guys have to say. And if you made it this far in the video, let me know what your favorite pet deck is. And if you're one of the dedicated players who still plays it to this day, or if you had to drop it, and why? What kind of issues have you guys ran into trying to play your favorite casual decks in a modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Environment? I'm really curious to see the answers. But until next time, I hope you guys all have a fantastic day. I love you guys. Bye.